Hey everybody, it's me, Colt. And this is yet another step on my journey. Now I know many of you who watch my videos know that I'm usually reviewing coffee, but one of the other great loves in my life is video games. And one of my favorite genres of video games is RPGs, or more specifically JRPGs, Japanese role-playing games. One of the things I really enjoy about games like, well, the one I'm playing now, Final Fantasy IX, and the Final Fantasy series in general, is the fact that it's not just a game, it's an engrossing story, it's a saga, it's something that pulls you in, and every one of them is different somehow. The graphics are different, obviously, because they come out for different machines at different times. The stories are different. They're not serial. Final Fantasy 1 isn't connected to Final Fantasy 10, and so on and so forth. So even though they bear the same name, you always get a different, new, and unique storyline. I'm just wandering around at this moment because the reason I don't really play Final Fantasy IX much anymore is because I'm stuck in this town and I don't actually know where to go. I've always been a big fan of video games. At least as far back as I can remember, me and my uncle, who got me into video games, would play Atari, which was a system he had when he was a teenager. And then I had a Nintendo for a while. And when I first got my Nintendo, there weren't a lot of role playing games like the ones I liked. I mean, there was always, of course, Zelda, but I never could get a copy of Zelda because it was too new at the time. And um, well, quite frankly, I had a problem playing that particular type of game. One thing I liked about the RPGs, specifically this type, was that you didn't have to be good at it. You didn't have to have fast reflexes or know all the moves. It was more about strategy. It was more about following the story and knowing where you were supposed to go, figuring out the weakness of that creature that you were supposed to be fighting so that you could fight them and defeat them. And the first taste I got of that was from my mom. Um, we grew up kind of hard for money, and as a lot of people who are hard for money will do, my mom would pawn stuff at a local pawn shop to get money for us to pay the bills and eat, or if she needed a pack of smokes or whatever. And whenever she would go back, sometimes, because she would go back when she finally got paid, she was just trying to keep us floating until the next paycheck came in, or until she had a good day from a good amount of tips from that day, because my mom, for a long time, was a waitress. So her good days and bad days were completely dependent on tips, which brings me to a point that I can't hammer home hard enough, and that is always tip your server. I always tip very well, and that's because my mom was a server, and if she ever found out I wasn't tipping my servers, she would hit me with things. So we go to the pawn shop one day, and I was like, Mom, can I get some new video games? Because I'd played all the ones I had, and now I was bored of them, like a little kid will be. And she said, okay, you've got $1. I've got $1 you can have. And I look into the case of all the Nintendo games, because at this point, Super Nintendo had been out for like 2.5 years. So all the Nintendo games were like 50 cents, $1, $2, $3. And I picked up two games that day. One was Zelda 2, The Adventures of Link, which I did make it all the way to that creepy black castle that appears, but I never could get out of that castle, so that was the end of that one for me. And the other one was Dragon Warrior 1. I wasn't familiar with games that saved themselves like Zelda and Dragon Warrior did, so the first thing I did when I got the game and started the character that I didn't realize someone else had built all the way up is I sold his weapons and armor for what I thought were better weapons and armor. And what I ended up doing was literally selling the best sword, the best armor, and the best shield in the entire game for pocket change. And I felt kind of stupid. But then again, I was like 7 or 8, so really, who cares? After that, I played that as much as I could. I was just hooked by it. The story. You have to save the princess from, I think back then it was like the dragon priest or the dragon warlock or some crazy stuff like that. And I just thought that was the best thing ever. I remember distinctly games like that, you couldn't just save anywhere on the world map. You had to go back to the castle, and you had to have the king save your adventure. The problem was is that while you could teleport back to the castle, you couldn't teleport back to where you had been. So every time you went back to the castle, you had to go all the way back across the entire world to where you were. And I was so tired one night, and I was so far away from the castle, and I didn't want to have to run all the way back to where I was. So I wrote a note that said, "I haven't saved, please don't turn this off." And I laid down in the floor in front of my Nintendo to guard it. And I went to sleep in the living room of my mother's house. And I woke up to my stepdad laughing at me the next day, because he saw the note and he could not believe that I had went to sleep in the floor when I had a perfectly good bed just to save a video game. So that should tell you the kind of insanity that I grew up dealing with. Because it was crazy that he just couldn't understand that sort of thing. And that was all there was for me for a while. And then in the 6th grade, my best friend Alden invited me over to his house. Now, Alden's mom was a lawyer, and she had a good job, and she could afford to get him newer stuff than my parents could afford to get me. So he had a Super Nintendo, and we would play hockey and stuff like that because he was real big into hockey. But another game he had was Final Fantasy II, which we now know was actually the Japanese Final Fantasy IV. We realized that us uncultured Americans didn't get 2 or 3 here in the States, and we didn't get 5 either. But we got 4 as 2 and 6 as 3. And at first, he had Final Fantasy II. Now, he wouldn't let me play it, which I always resented him for at the time, because I wanted to play that game so bad. But I also understood why later on in life, because, well, you only get one save in those games, and he didn't want me messing up his stuff, so he'd just make me watch him play, which, believe it or not, was still kind of fun. So that's what it did. But from there, the Final Fantasy games just kind of drew me in. The storylines, like you take example, this is just a Super Nintendo game, but in Final Fantasy IV, it's not, the graphics weren't great. I mean, they were amazing for the time because they were the best that you could get. But the storyline, a man who was trying to balance his loyalty to his king with the guilt he felt in following orders that he didn't agree with, and the little love story that he and his girlfriend had, and his best friend turning on him, and just a dozen other amazing things that this game had going for it. And this is in, like, the early 90s. I mean, you just didn't see games like that very often. I mean, I realize on Sega, which is the systems that I ended up playing later, they had Phantasy Star and Star Ocean and whatnot. But Final Fantasy is what I wanted to talk about today, because the thing is that the games themselves are just so engrossing. They're so endearing. There's such a strong message and feeling in each and every one of them. And I feel like if you've never played it and you watch this video, if you're one of my 7 followers, or you clicked on it because I posted it on my timeline and you see this and you decide to play the game, any of them, just once, I feel like I will have done something to show you one of the most beautiful things that has ever happened in my life. I never got to play 4 until I was an adult, and I got it on the PlayStation later on when it was part of Final Fantasy Anthology. I didn't start playing 6 until last year. I still have it, but it's on my PS3, and right now my PS4 is the only thing hooked up. So, I guess I'd start at the beginning with Final Fantasy IV. And over the course of the video, which is a long one, I'll discuss the things I liked and didn't like and what made Final Fantasy Final Fantasy. One of the things, of course, that I like about Final Fantasy is the gripping storylines they give you. Final Fantasy IV, it's a story of redemption and trying to figure out and weigh the struggle between doing what's right and doing what you're supposed to do. Do you follow the orders of your king, or do you do what you believe is correct? And how do you make that decision when everything you are you owe to the person who's telling you to do bad things? And then you look at a game like Final Fantasy VI, which when it originally came out in the States was Final Fantasy III. And all the different interlocking storylines that the girl who doesn't really know who she is or where she's from and trying to keep the bad guys from getting her to a soldier who lost their family, to another a king who's just trying to do the right thing, and all these little characters mixed in together, all set against this horrible demonic-like creature who is literally nothing more than a jester with magic, but the magic he possesses and the acumen and strategy in his mind is just so powerful that not only is he bent on world destruction, not domination, mind you, destruction, not only does he yearn for it, but so powerful and conniving is he that he actually accomplishes it. And that's just the halfway point of the game. I mean, like, you still have to do stuff after that. The world's screwed. They've blown up, been destroyed, and now you have to go fix it. And those were the two that I got to watch, but I never really got to play until I became an adult. For me, and like for many elder and middle of the road millennials, it didn't really start until PlayStation 1. When they came out with that gorgeous jewel that was Final Fantasy VII. Polygonal graphics and all. I remember seeing it in the store and thinking, oh my god, I have a PlayStation. I want that game. But it was $70. I was a teenager with no job and no legal right to work in this frickin' country, which was fun. And I guess when I yearned for this frickin' game so hard, my uncle, who had literally been my drug dealer for video games when I was a kid, he saw it, because without me knowing it, he bought it for me and he gave it to me. I can't remember what holiday it was. It was probably Christmas, but it might have been my birthday. And he gave it to me, and he set me up a TV in my grandma's dining room, because no way was he going to give up his TV for that crap. And my grandma, forget about it. If a soap opera or Jag wasn't on, the TV just wasn't on. He set me up my own little place next to the dining room table where I had the chair, and I would just play Final Fantasy after school every day. And during the summer, that's pretty much all I would do. I didn't have a lot of friends at that point in my life, so I just played Final Fantasy, and the story there, that was the first story that I got to actually watch myself from start to finish, and that was when I realized just how deep it went. You have a man whose memories lie to him, who is simultaneously who he thinks he is and not, because he thinks he's someone else in addition to himself, and a compelling a bad guy who was once a good man, driven insane by the revelation of his true nature. And it was the first time I was ever introduced to what I could legitimately say was an epic, compelling villain in Sephiroth. And it's also where I started noticing all the tropes. Oh my god, the tropes. Final Fantasy games. If you're ever wondering if you're playing a real Final Fantasy game, now understand I don't mean the knockoff Final Fantasy games, the tactics games. By the way, I hate the Final Fantasy Tactics series. If I wanted to play chess, I would play chess. Okay? And don't even get me started on Crystal Chronicles. I don't even know what the hell they're talking about half the time. But the core Final Fantasy numbered games are among my favorite, and the tropes in them are ridiculous. So, while we're starting this, that, and the third, I might as well start with my favorite part of all, which is how to tell if you're actually playing a Final Fantasy game. 1, there will be someone named Sid. And he might be an airship pilot, he might be a captain, he might be a mechanic, he might be an evil doctor bent on world domination. There will always be a guy named Sid. Always. I have played Final Fantasy 2. Rather, 4. I have played Final Fantasy 4. I have played Final Fantasy 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 12, and 15. And there is always a Sid. Number 2, the bad guy will always be ridiculously attractive or compelling character. Something about the Japanese culture I find when it comes to anime and video games is they always make the bad guy just this strikingly gorgeous, forever young type person. Sephiroth, Kefka, Vayne Solador, the wizard from 15 whose name escapes me at the moment. The bad guy, even the bad guy behind the evil queen in 9. Always, always, always like a blonde or a redhead with striking features, a compelling backstory, and they're always obscenely powerful. And probably the most recognizable trope of all time, of course, are chocobos. These big ostrich-sized baby chicken-looking things that they're just everywhere. They're in every game. You can't throw a Masamune without hitting 5 chocobos in a real Final Fantasy game. And I love that about it because it gives you, even though each story is different and in every situation you're moving in a different direction and following different characters, the first time you run into Dr. Sid or Captain Sid, or the first time you find a chocobo race, or you find someone who rents chocobos so you can ride them, it's like you feel like you're home. It's warm and comforting. And when you add that to storylines like 7, 2 men just trying to discover the truth in all the lies, or in 8, a group of friends trying to figure out how everything is connected and why they remember things that they can't seem to remember. It doesn't make sense, but if you play the game, you will know exactly what I'm talking about. Granted, I don't know a lot about Final Fantasy IX, this one right here, because as I've stated, getting to this village of, I think it's called Lidlum, whatever it's called, is the furthest I've made it in this game. Because, well, I'll get to the things that aggravate me about these games in a minute. And that's 9, and then you get 10. A young man displaced in time, magically finding himself amongst a group of adventurers, one of whom is a man from his past, and trying to figure out everything that's going on. And it's beautiful. And then you go to 12, which is by far one of my favorite storyline wise, because it's literally a street rat from a downtrodden and conquered city finding the strength and finding the truth and finding a way to bring the corruption that plagues his entire people down entirely by circumstance, through no machination of his own in the beginning. Now, I talked about 4 and 6 and 7 and 8 and 9 and 10 and even 12. But when I tell you that, for me anyway, the absolute magnum opus of storytelling for Squaresoft / Square Enix / whatever else they've been called is Final Fantasy 15, understand that I mean that with every fiber of my being. And it's a simple enough story. It has its layers. There's war, 2 warring kingdoms, there's a prince involved, people trying to make it to their destiny, and whatever else, blah, blah, blah. But that's not really what Final Fantasy 15 is. Final Fantasy 15 is really just a story about friendship. 4 friends facing impossible odds, knowing at the end of the day that even if they win, they'll lose. And having the courage to stand by one another and to stay the course, even though they know that they won't live to see the safe new world that they're fighting so hard for. In each one of these games, there are moments. Some of them have been immortalized on the internet for generations, like the death of Aerith, or the revelation of Golbez's true identity, or Ultimecia's true identity. And in each situation, you find yourself going, oh my god. And somehow, even though the tragedies in these games strike, and don't get me wrong, it's not just words and people on a screen. When you play these games, they drag you in with them. You feel like you're there. So when a character dies or sacrifices themselves, when a character fights and loses, when a character becomes injured or goes missing, you feel it right down in your very spirit. And one of the most beautiful and magical things about these games is that that's the story dynamic. From start to finish, that's how the game works. It's one of the only game series I've ever seen where you can win and still somehow lose, and you're okay with it. Every time. No matter what game it is, no matter what the outcome, no matter what the twist ending is, no matter how M. Night Shyamalan the third act gets, you're always happy. Now, there are things I don't like about the games. For example, this one, Final Fantasy IX. It's too much talking and not enough action. I mean, yeah, I could go outside and grind, but even this right here, I have no idea where I'm supposed to go. I've talked to all my people, at least the ones I could find. I've walked in every direction. I've done everything I can think of. I've taken all these little train thingies here, there, and frickin' everywhere. I've talked to everybody. and I can't figure it the hell out to save my life. I just don't know. And sometimes they are a little trying on the patience. Sometimes the bad guys are too difficult, or there's a difficulty spike that's just ridiculous. Which, of course, is also a fun challenge in that it challenges you to go out and grind your ass off to get the levels required. And every time you beat one of these compelling bad guys, it ends up being worth all that time and effort. From Kane to Vane Solador, Seymour Guado, Sephiroth. Every time you meet a great big bad in this game, you can't wait to see what happens when you splatter them all over the place. And when they kick your ass, you're just so much more determined. You just roll up your sleeves, get yourself a new cup of coffee, and you just go, all right, game on, asshole, game on. And that's what's beautiful about it. 1 minute, you're pissed beyond all recognition and can't believe you lost. The next, you're determined to win by the end. You're frickin' crying happy tears for the most beautiful story you've ever seen in your life. And I know probably nobody's going to watch this. I'll probably end up taking it down like all my other videos eventually. Not because I'm unhappy with the work, but just because why would I leave up something like this if it was just for me? Which is maybe what it was. But if you do watch this video and you manage to make it through the whole thing and you end up deciding to try one of these games, I hope you enjoy it as much as I have enjoyed every single last minute of the last 30 years of playing these games. And all the games like them. Because if you grew up like I did, sometimes you couldn't afford Final Fantasy, so you had Star Ocean or Phantasy Star. Or maybe you had to play on an old system and you played Dragon Warrior. Or Dragon Quest, which is I believe what it's called now. But it doesn't matter. At the end of the day, what mattered was you enjoyed the story. You had a good time. And in situations like mine, sometimes I would end up picking this game up over that game just because I knew it would last longer. Final Fantasy XII I got because I only had enough money for one game. And I knew it would be a long time before I bought another one because I just didn't have any money. So I picked Final Fantasy XII not just because of my love of the Final Fantasy series, but because I knew it would take months upon months to win. And it did. It took me 6 months with the amount of time I actually get to play games anymore. Anyway, I think I've rambled on long enough, and be surprised if anybody makes it this far in the video anyway. Like and share, give it a thumbs up if you appreciate it. You can always subscribe to my channel. I think I have all of about 7 subscribers right now. I'd love to get up to 10. Be a personal victory for me. If you want to talk about video games, you can comment on the video. You can find me on Facebook. My name is Will Wyatt. It's a picture of me. You really can't miss it. Find all the videos. You can always search Coffee Journey. I've shot several of those on Facebook, my live videos. And of course, you can always slide into my DMs. I am at APColt, C-O-A-L-T, on Twitter. So, until next time, for lack of anything else, I guess I'll just bastardize my own catchphrase. If you can't play great games, play good games. If you can't play good games, play some games. And if you can't play some games, you should go somewhere else. Enjoy your life. I do.